Of what CTE looks like when a neuropathologist has sliced through a brain and they apply a stain to that tissue to look for a certain protein. In CTE, it's the tau protein. That tau protein is involved in a lot of diseases, but it's different when we see it in CTE. So all those brown areas is where you're seeing abnormal tau in the brain. Tau is a normally occurring protein in the brain. It has a very important function. It stabilizes neurons. It's a healthy part of our brain. But when it becomes dysregulated, it misfolds, it tangles up inside the neuron, it suffocates it, ultimately kills it. And that's what this brown stuff is detecting. It's detecting the bad version of tau. And in CTE, the way we differentiate it from things like Alzheimer's disease is where we're seeing it. You can see this really densely packed brown staining at the depth of that fold in the brain that we call a sulcus. It clumps up around blood vessels at the bottom of that fold. And it specifically affects certain types of neurons in the brain. And on the far right, you're just seeing an even zoomed in picture of it. That circle in the middle of those pictures on the right is actually a blood vessel. So you might see that it's darker right around the blood vessel, and it gets a little less severe as you move away from it. So this is a neuropathological diagnosis. This is akin to Alzheimer's disease. It's akin to Lewy body disease. It is not memory loss. It is not dementia. It is a potential reason you develop those problems, but it is not the same thing as those problems. This is just one more picture showing some of the differences between what Alzheimer's disease looks like in the brain versus CTE. So on the top, those are pictures of Alzheimer's disease. If you just looked at those first two pictures, what you should see is that in Alzheimer's disease, that tau is kind of all throughout that fold in the brain. It's not clearly just collecting in the pocket like you see in CTE. And there's some thought that it's actually something about the trauma-induced aspect of CTE that leads to that area of the brain being really susceptible to it. And why in Alzheimer's disease, it's much more confluent and spread throughout. And on the far right, you're seeing a zoomed-in picture again right around a blood vessel. Where again, in Alzheimer's disease, you don't see that it's clearly worse right around that blood vessel, where in CTE it is. So if you're putting your neuropathologist hat on and you're literally looking at this stuff through a microscope, these are the types of things they're looking for to say, this person has disease X, this person has disease Y. Because they've seen enough of these to start to be able to see a pattern that there's clearly different diseases occurring. And as mentioned for Alzheimer's disease, you need also to have these plaques, these amyloid plaques in the brain. These are not diagnostic of CTE. You can get them because as we get older, we're at a higher risk of developing these plaques, but in CTE, you don't need them. If you don't have those plaques, you don't get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, full stop. So on the flip side, and maybe I'll wrap up here, is we've now started to work on a way to come up with, are there clusters of symptoms that make us more confident that the reason that they're having these problems is CTE? So we've proposed this idea of traumatic encephalopathy syndrome. So again, this word syndrome being important. We're now just talking